For the agenda, I was going to talk about a couple of things, and I'm not going to talk about the how of digital transformation, but some of the outcomes and signs of digital transformation. I'm not going to talk much about Microsoft's own digital transformation, but what, obviously we went from selling licenses, a product, to selling a service, which we went through a huge digital transformation to do that. But kind of what are we seeing with our customers? And then a deeper dive into the digital feedback loop. I'll kind of use a non-financial services industry example. And then looking at how we've been seeing the digital feedback loop change Microsoft's strategy on how we've approached the marketplace. And then I have a customer example if we have time. I'm thinking for right now, let's take questions at the end of each section. So I'll break at the end of these each of these agenda items, and happy to answer whatever questions I can. All right, so with that, let's talk about what we're seeing from a digital transformation. We often talk about this Industrial Revolution 4.0, where really software and technology has transformed traditional industry practices. And that's not happening evenly across the industry. I think if looking at some of the examples here, if you think about Tesla, not only did they kind of remove the dealerships from the ecosystem or fixed pricing, but if you're a Tesla owner, and I'm not, but if you ask a friend, not how, but where do Teslas get repaired, you'll be surprised to hear most of them get them serviced in their own driveway. And I'm going to go through this in a little deeper dive later on. I think that's been kind of interesting. You think about iRobot, a consumer robot that does the cleaning. Ecobee, there have been AI in thermometers since I built one in 1985. So they've been around for a while. But combining like touchscreens and the web and home sensors to manage your home based on your presence and to enable you to save money has kind of been a change. Uber, just think about it. They replaced the taxi dispatcher. That was the model. Just get rid of the dispatcher with software and give an app to the user and give an app to the driver and do the matching that way instead of the dispatcher. So we replaced a whole role with technology. Think about Netflix. Just think about it before it got into media and it replaced a whole retail store model. Blockbuster basically went out of business because they were delivering content online. And now think about how they are challenging cable. They just changed that model on head. You don't have a TV guide anymore. You get recommendations based on what you want, what you watch. And then of course, Airbnb, which took excessive home ownership and created an ecosystem for leisure space that's really upended the hospitality industry. So what's interesting in all these companies and what they have in common is their business models are based on a digital native experience that's developed and delivered through software. So one of the things that we have been seeing is the way that these are being implemented. And it really comes down to one of the differentiators is the percentage of developers to the total share of the employees. I mean, let's just look at the right-hand side of this. If you compare just Tesla and BMW, you're looking at a 1.5x number of software developers in that industry. In sound systems, Sonos has got 3x Bose, or just iRobot, which is, you're looking at 6.5 times the number of developers for employees. And that is really going to be an important, and we're going to look at that in a little more detail. So what that really does is now by having that software advantage is the digital natives can modify and update their products almost 3 times faster. So that means they get to market almost 3 times faster than their industry leaders. And they also, one of the tells that we've seen is by responding to customer feedback faster, they improve their customer ratings. So customers want to use their products more. So if you look at the marketplace and how frequently apps are updated, You look at Walmart, like where they are in 2019 versus where they were in 2016. You know, at 40 updates that they did in the previous 12 months in June, so June 2019, a year ago, that's 3.5 updates a month that they did to their mobile app. Target is 2.5 updates a month. And then if we look at the others like a Vanguard or a Citi or Wells or Allstate, you know, they're doing almost one update a month. And that update obviously drives a better customer experiences so that you're seeing a lift in revenues for those customers, practicing continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD, is pushing almost every company now to be a software company. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about how we see this, happening into that digital feedback loop. How do you get enough information about your customers that you can make that many changes that often? So if you think about your customers and their products, it's really around, the digital feedback is really about leveraging data that you're going to get. The challenge is going to be, you're going to get so much data. How are you going to analyze that? And that's where we see AI coming in, these intelligent systems coming in to collect that customer signals and that product telemetry and kind of make sense out of it. So I'm going to walk through an example that we've all seen in the marketplace. One of the things that I think have been interesting is, we've talked about this before, is Tesla. And I think, Elon Musk mastered this feedback loop in his car. And I think it's a more important aspect than the kind of self-driving aspect he's done, which is definitely revolutionary, or that your car is actually serviced in your driveway. And this will actually take us through an example of that. But let's go through them doing this kind of digital feedback. So on the bottom left, someone puts in a complaint. They're driving this car and the GPS says the speed of this turn is 45, but everybody's taking this turn at 30 miles an hour, so I've got to hit the brake. So he's got a signal from the marketplace customers, and also he can validate that signal against the telemetry from the car. Is people hitting the brakes? The customers, I have a customer complaint. I can validate that from my product. And then now the issue gets to be, how are you going to do that over the data? Because AI will help prioritize matching the customer signals and the product signals. But what you begin to realize is, once you start collecting these signals, it's a massive amount of data. So that's the reason I need AI. So let me give you another example. If you think about a 737 or an Airbus 320, each engine generates 10 gigabytes of data per second. 10 gigabytes per second at an engine, and what is Southwest has like 1,200 737s. I can't, times two is just, I can't have someone go through that amount of data. I need to automate that. And really the only way you're going to be able to accomplish that is by looking, using technologies like AI to find anomalies out there. So once I find those anomalies, the business can take action on that insight. I can plan a program to address it. As I mentioned earlier to some people, that in our own Bing search engine, we'll conduct 300 A/B tests a day. So if everybody here went to Bing, we did the same search, the first result would be different among at least half of us, because we want to see which one are you going to take as an option. So in this model, I actually could do A/B testing. I could push over-the-air updates to different cars to see how the driver kind of reacts. So I've got these signals as inputs, and I've got these actions as outputs. And I need to coordinate both effectively. I need to communicate to my customers what I'm going to do, and I need to do, push those changes out to my products. So There's two other parts of this that I wanted to cover in the discussion, because you also have two other parts to this, your whole product life cycle. You've got operations, and you are going to be wanting to capture information about your operations. So one of the things that Tesla was doing, because your car has to be recharged, and the most common place to get them recharged very quickly is the dealerships have fast chargers. They'll be charged in 30 minutes. Tesla began to see a pattern looking over its telemetry that people were taking trips based on where Tesla dealerships were, because they could get their cars charged in 30 minutes. So, and actually Tesla updated their navigation systems. So the car would take you along routes where the dealerships would be that you could get it charged. But by looking at that, Tesla began to realize they could create an ecosystem of these fast charging stations along common customer travel routes. And so they created this ecosystem, created a way for these supercharging stations to create, to offer profitable services when customers stopped in for their 30 minutes to recharge. So this is a case where by looking over the data from their customers, their products, and their operations, they created a new business model and a new business ecosystems that created a profitable business for partners who wanted to open up charging stations. I think on the other part of this that is interesting is now getting that information to your people. Using all that data and AI, can I now look for things that I can empower my people with to support and do things differently? So you've got now your support staffs, you've got call centers. They can see all of my customer interactions. I can see common problems across them and the products performs. And one of the things that's interesting, that's important about your people, there's a great book that was done, I think in 2010 by J.B. Wood called Consumption Economics. And it really looks at, how mainly it was geared towards, I would say, the public clouds and SaaS providers, is how do you grow your business? It really from that learned that the way you're going to grow your business is through your service arm, because your service arm is going to be upselling services and new products because they're going to be interacting with your customers. So this people part becomes this reinforcing loop for you to kind of upsell your products and services. You're still going to have a sales organization that's going to go out and do the original sale, but all of the incremental growth now happens through that support people. And can you get the information that you need to actually do that? So let's take a quick look at the digital feedback loop in kind of general. It's the real trick is companies that effectively use the digital feedback loop decide on what their development questions are first. And then you can go about collecting the data that you need to make those decisions to achieve the right impact. So what are those questions that I need to be asking that then generate what are the signals that I need to be collecting? So, the keys are there kind of what's the right decision, what's the right data, and then what's the right time. And really by establishing those 3 R's for your context, you kind of can ask yourself these guiding questions, or what are the critical decisions that we need to be making? What are the critical digital feedback that we need to be collecting to make that decision? And then, now we have this information, what else do we need to make that decision? So really in that first part is getting the signals out of the customer, the signals out of operations, the signals out of products, the signals out of your people. And technology really makes it easy to collect. It actually makes it too easy to collect. So you're going to start to collect massive amounts of information. So you're now going to have to, collect and synthesize that information. And again, we talked about this is going to be a massive amount of information. You're not going to be able to do that yourself. And that's really where AI comes in. And I will tell you the secret that Microsoft has learned about the best AI organizations. The best AI organizations don't have the largest number of data scientists. They don't have the most data. You need a lot of it, but they're not the people that have the most data. The secret to AI is the velocity with which you do AI experiments. And let me spend some time talking about that. Because when you do an AI experiment, you begin to understand a little more information about your data. And it teaches you something new. And then you can take that something new and do the next experiment. And if you have a very difficult time doing those experiments or putting those experiments into production, remember I talked about that A/B testing early on, which is just a way of doing, covering information about your data, that is going to be critical. And that's where, I've been on a couple of AI projects, and there's this impedance mismatch between the data scientists and the developers. I think we've all heard about DevOps, but now we're starting to see things like ML ops and AI ops coming up, which is setting up processes, agile processes, to get data scientists and developers working together faster. It's common in marketing campaigns where the data scientists come up with an algorithm, they throw it over the wall, and then the developers rewrite that or code up that algorithm in some other programming language that they know. And then it goes into production. And then the finger pointing goes because, the marketing people said I was going to get a 30% uplift on this, and we're not seeing that. Well, the developers didn't code it right. And the developers, so I will say that spending some time looking at how, from an AI perspective, you kind of operate is really getting to be important. And then lastly, you've got to take the results of that and push it back out to, to the business to improve those business outcomes. Really, the digital feedback loop, moves us away from that old plan, execute, and measure mentality, because, you can't wait until, to put the plan together, to kind of execute the plan and then measure. It has to be done on an incremental basis. See in the classic digital feedback loop, it's an agile methodology of learn, reflect, decide, and act mentality. So that you're going to do these very, small changes to, very quickly see what the outcome is and then pivot and adjust as it goes. So it's really not using the digital feedback loop to gather data for its own sake, but to think about what additional evidence you're going to need to make better decisions. And then, okay, I'm going to need this information. How am I going to get that data? I've been on AI projects, great idea, and then we realize we can't get the data we need to do that experiment. So where are we going to get that data? How are we going to approximate that data? So again, it's really gets down to, with the AI, it's the velocity with which you can do these experiments that lead you to new business insights that can lead to new business outcomes. So having done this, actually, this changed the way we've been running our business. And I'm going to take you through that from a strategy perspective. So, the challenge is to execute on this feedback loop is, you don't have the digital information that you need. So where are you going to get it? And then the other one you classic see in companies is it's just data is siloed. It was created by the marketing group and they've got the customer, potential customers. You've got a billing department which actually has the customer database, and each of those data are siloed. You need to somehow figure out how to put them together. And so what we've done internally, and I apologize because this looks like a marketing slide and I don't mean it that way, but it's really a stepping stone to how we've executed on this 1-2 strategy, is having, an infrastructure and a public infrastructure and a platform as a service, so that we can target operations and developers. Power Platform you can think of as a robotic process automation, an RPA platform. So we can then target your citizen developers, your non-traditional developers, to start automating processes in their operations to improve it. And then Dynamics 365 is, of course, our CRM and ERP platform, and Office 365 is the productivity suite. But these together began to allow us to start looking at that digital feedback loop through different lenses. And so that led to this kind of, we've been going through this point of, we're a very data-driven company. And then we began to collect information. We actually, during our own digital transformation, had behavioral scientists assigned to each of our leadership team. The CEO and each of his directs had a behavioral scientist to figure out what is the data we need to be collecting about our employee and our operations, and start creating these insights onto how we were running as a business. One of the interesting stories from an operational point of view is we used to be a product licensing company. So the developers were gold on function features, not operations. And we would sell the license, and it was up now to the enterprise that was installing the software to run and operate it. So constantly things, there were operational issues and support organizations. When we took that in-house and we were going to run it ourselves, one of the things they did immediately is they put the developers on call with operations to deal with problems. But they're now our problems. So if it breaks in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., the developer's getting woken up, which was never happening before because it was a support organization that had to do that. And there's one thing you can be sure about, having been a developer and myself, is when you're woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a production problem, not only do you fix that problem, but you make sure that the reason you got woken up is never going to happen in any of your other code in other places. So what was interesting for us was the operational aspects of our products began to improve significantly, because now the developers were on the hook for that. So again, a lesson that we learned from looking at the data and then taking the actions, and how do we have to change our people and organizations. And it's still a problem. We do have developers like everybody else who are like, I don't do operations, I don't do DevOps. So, they don't want to do the operational side. The flip is, your operational people need to be developers. And again, there are operational people who are like, I don't do scripts. But you can't, from this scale of information and things going on, you're going to need to get your people moving from operations into development. So we began to start applying this with our customers and helping them do it. And Tesla's a good example, Stample, there's other stories like that. But something else happened along the way, that we began to realize that there were these ecosystems of these digital feedback loops. So in this case, they began to span different industries. So we might be working with this on a retailer, let's say Target, whose payments are done through MasterCard, and then products have to be shipped out through, let's say, FedEx. This is where we began to see these synergies and this whole ecosystem begin to really expand, where there are now, when we're doing these projects, we're beginning to look at where are the other places that there are business interactions, that if I could start taking actions and signals from those different participants in the ecosystems, I now can start feeding into, I'm going to need to be shipping more products, or I have a price point problem, or there are other areas, and I've got a customer example we'll take after this. But what's beginning to happen is we're getting asked to get involved in ecosystems to kind of make these things work at a different level. And that has been really a surprise. I think we're still trying to, wrap our head around what does that mean from a business perspective. I decided I'd take some things from, outside the United States when we began to look at kind of where we've been helping customers do this. So it was interesting in our, we have our earnings report coming up next week, but the previous earning reports, which would have been done in April in the midst of the COVID crisis, our CEO made a very interesting statement, which I think caught a number of us by surprise. He said basically, we've seen more digital transformation in the past 2 months than we've seen in the past 2 years. Businesses having to work virtually really pushed a lot of transformation in these companies, and they're recognizing they need to change to be working in this environment. So if I look at what we kind of see in these types of engagements, you need, like any kind of digital transformation project, you need to identify what are the key strategic priorities you need to go after. And from that, you can then design a digital feedback loop that begins to connect the parts of the business that haven't been connected together. And I would say that becomes important. That's where it's going to be we would call internally a growth mindset comes in. Because, operationally, the digital feedback loop is a fail fast model. We say crawl, walk, run nowadays, but that really means fail fast. If you're crawling, you're going to be bumping into things, and you're going to be adjusting, and then you're going to, do it faster, and then you're going to get into that run. So one of the ones I'm going to look at is a project we had done with Maersk. Really, they were coming to us and saying, we need some help with new customer experiences, new customer relationships. And they really wanted to think about kind of an end-to-end relationship to kind of bring their customer back. And to achieve that experience and relationship, they needed to retool their employees to provide, better services. So their vision was really to go from being a shipping company to a logistic provider, and compete with a bunch of new entrants that were coming into the marketplace. So, how do they make that transition from a shipping company to a supply chain partner? And that was really kind of the goal. So the customer would, put the order in and then could track this thing from an end-to-end perspective about exactly where it is. And of course, when you are doing perishable goods, that becomes extremely critical, that the temperature of, if it's frozen, it has remained frozen throughout the trip. If it's, like I said, a perishable item, that it has not been bruised or damaged during the trip. And so how do you put that kind of scenario together? So, a public case study that's out there, we began to look at this kind of the feedback. A lot of the initial orders and stuff were done on paper. So just simple stuff, kind of we automate that. And then, but when we're automating that, you now have more information. You know who the players are, who the partners are, but you also now can mine that data to do forecasting analytics. So just by digitizing it, they had a better view of what their business was going to look like. Now with the IoT, enabling everything, you have real-time information about where packages are, where ships are, and now you can keep customers appraised of it's going to be going through customs, it's going to be here, you're going to need to pick it up, and give them enough lead time to kind of execute on being able to get their package. And then creating these apps that let them see the customer actually see that real-time status. So both the customer and the employee, they can keep pictures of, because everything's IoT enabled, there's cameras, there's stuff, process that so that when someone puts in a request, okay, go find the camera at that loading dock, find an image of that container, send them a picture of that container that it's not been damaged. The ship arrives, show that that container number actually made it off the ship, it wasn't lost at sea. And so those simple things improves that customer experience, such that, you know, they have an entity called Seago is now you can offer these, you know, value-added services to the customers that bring them back to using Mercy again to take care of their shipping.